question everything. Hello, and thank you for joining. Wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, or perhaps good evening. I am Khaled Fattal. I'm the chairman of the MLI Group and the publisher of Survivability News. And today's podcast is something very specific to you and your own prosperity because they are at stake. First of all, let me tell you what the title of this podcast is and what I'm going to be addressing. But right after that, I'm going to be asking you to do me a favor in the way you analyze and you process the information I'm going to give you. So to put it in the right perspective, let me read you what the topic is of this podcast so that we stay focused at what is it we're trying to accomplish here. So why is escalating U.S. complicity in Israel's war crimes on Gaza civilians putting Americans and the U.S. economy's prosperity at immediate, unprecedented, and permanent risk? I will also address, can this dire prospect be reversed and how? Now, what I'm going to be asking you in the favor, please, if you're going to take value from what I'm going to be talking to you about, I would strongly urge you to put aside your traditional mindsets, your conventional wisdom, and most definitely your ideological positions on how you voted, whether you're Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, all of those wonderful things that you belong to. No disrespect to any of them, but I need you to put those aside and purely look at what I give you in terms of the facts, their ramifications, and how they impact U.S. prosperity, economically and politically, as well as the United States standing around the world. But more importantly, how do they impact you as a citizen of the United States and the Western Hemisphere, especially if you are a citizen of Western democracies? So let me dig in. The U.S. complicity in the war crimes, and some people have called it the genocide, that has been committed by Israel on civilians in Gaza. I'm not going to go into the details. You've heard it all over, and I'm sure you already have heard about close to about 20,000 civilians have been killed. More than 7,000 children have been killed in the most horrific of manners, and so many groups and organizations and leaders, many of whom are not just Arabs or just American, but they are of the Jewish faith or even Israelis who have called what Israel has done at minimum war crimes and up to genocide. Now, why this is also critical to the United States? Because the United States is clearly complicit. And let me define what I mean by the United States. The US government is clearly complicit in these war crimes and genocide on civilians. And I will be talking to you as to why this is critically to be recognized as a statement of fact, because moving forward, this has direct impact to the topic of this podcast and why I'm talking to you here and why it is in your best interest as citizens of the West, especially in the US, to do something about it before it impacts you economically and politically. So with that in mind, the complicity of the United States, 70 days now plus in the war in the Middle East, and the pulverization of Gaza and indiscriminate killing of civilians has actually led a major awareness and awakening by citizens all over the world, many of whom, by the way, are in Western capitals, including in cities as well, including here in the United States, London, Paris, you name it, and places and cities and capitals all over the world as well, rising against this barbaric atrocity towards civilians. This, by the way, you noticed the language I'm speaking, I'm separating what Israel believes needs to do militarily in response to the October 7th attack by Hamas, and what Hamas believes it is legitimately has the right in defending and fighting against an occupier of its own land, and by UN Charter, it has the right for resisting by any means necessary. This is already written in the Charter of the United Nations. So I'm stepping away from these two arguments, what Hamas and Palestinians have the right for resistance against occupation, or the Israel's right to self-defense, which by international law can be challenged because it is an occupier of the Palestinians and their land. But step away from all this. Just look at where we are today. The world, my dear friends, sees the United States as complicit, with 100% clarity, complicit in these war crimes, in this genocide perpetrated by Israel. Now, why this is critical? The mass uproar by citizens all over the world about the suffering of innocent children and Palestinians has actually had a totally new turn that we've never seen before in the Middle East conflict, and within the media and the narratives that have been talked about and disseminated through mainstream media and non-mainstream media. The narratives that normally carry the way through the CBS, NBC, CNN, and the likes, BBC, ITV, all of those standard mainstream channels have actually not been strong enough to actually weather the tide of public opinion on a global level that Israel is committing war crimes and genocide, regardless whether it has or doesn't have the right to self-defense. This, incidentally, has actually triggered some new phenomena we hadn't seen before. Now, many of you may have seen the recent problems or issues that arose when Elon Musk made a statement which then many Israel supporters deemed as anti-Semitic. And then as a result, many companies who support Israel and donate money to them threatened or pulled their advertising money from Twitter, formerly Twitter, X. And I recall seeing a video recently of Elon Musk where he was being interviewed. He said, your advertisers are abandoning you because of your position on anti-Semitism. And incidentally, you'll notice whenever the claim that Elon Musk committed anti-Semitic statements or said anti-Semitic statements, they're always referred to as his anti-Semitic remarks. Never have I seen, or seldom, I haven't seen many of these mainstream medias identify specifically what Elon Musk said, so that you, as a citizen, in a democratic society, can make the judgment whether his statement is anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic. Virtually all reports quote his remarks as being anti-Semitic and continue with their narrative. They never really quote you what he said. And in essence, without going on to tangents, you need to start distinguishing between what is truly anti-Semitic, what is not anti-Semitic. So the criticism, and you may have heard this before, and I would like to hear it from you because I've been saying this for more than 20 years. The criticism of any political party or any government in the world is a legitimate civic responsibility of any citizen of that country or another country. So I have the right to criticize, so do you, the British government on their policy on immigration, or the elderly, or the rainbows, or how you treat animals, whatever. This is legit. That also applies to the state of Israel, my dear. Now, anti-Semitism and the definition that is currently being used in the West and by many governments is not that where you are actually referring to the people of the Jewish faith, which if you say something about somebody of the Jewish faith, that would be anti-Semitic. The definition and the measuring stick is any criticism of the state of Israel, a country, or the political apparatus of its governments, is deemed anti-Semitic. This is the measuring stick you are being fed and you are being measured by. And ladies and gentlemen, the day has come where that actually is taken and thrown in the dustbin of history. We as human beings need to measure people by what they do, what they say, and the repercussions of those actions or statements, not by some manufactured narrative of definition and keeping the public ill-informed. So you now have the opportunity to know the difference between what is anti-Semitic and not anti-Semitic. So I've regressed now. Let me get back to the main point. So you remember when so many of the companies like Disney and many other companies pulled out its advertising, and Elon Musk his reply was F them. He didn't care. The point I'm bringing to you here is there's a counter action that had already been taking place globally. And this is people around the world have started voting with their economics on their daily basis. And you wonder, what in the world is Khaled talking about? There has been an unprecedented momentum of citizens and consumers all over the world boycotting not only Israeli products, but American products, my dear friends. Now, you start thinking, what would that impact the prosperity of the United States and the prosperity of businesses in the US and Americans individually and families? So people all over the world are starting to boycott American products. More importantly, there have been numerous apps you'll download on your phone, and anytime you go into the shops and you're looking to buy something, either scan the barcode or put the name of the company in, and it will tell you whether that company supports Israel, sending money to it, or doesn't. And then you have the choice of actually consuming its products or not. Something else you should know, if you didn't, on a separate note, there are, to the last count that I recall, 26 states in the United States where if you as a citizen are taking a government job or a state job, you must swear allegiance to the state of Israel and agree to not boycott its product. I mean, I thought we lived in a country where we're supposed to be free, freedom of thinking, freedom of choice, freedom of faith, of religion, freedom of all. How can a state in the United States of America in the 21st century, any state, legislate that if you choose to boycott Israeli products, you would be deemed anti-Semitic and you go to jail? Exactly. This is happening in our home, my fellow Americans. And by the way, I'm not running for office. I just want to enlighten you so you can make better informed decisions. When you factor the horrific results and when you factor in the atrocities that have taken place in Gaza, on Gaza citizens, and the reaction by citizens all over the world, many of whom never cared about Israel or never cared about Palestinians. Let's be clear. Some of whom, or many of whom as well, were staunch supporters of Israel. In fact, there have been important American characters, I'm not going to go name names, who traditionally have always been supporters of the state of Israel. They have changed their position. Now they are labeling what Israel is doing is war crimes and genocide. So, my dear friends, when you factor that in, it is in your interest not only to live up to your standard of what humanity is and take an action or take a position, but it is also in your best interest to actually safeguard your own economic and individual prosperity. And I'm going to show you how. So this outcome, the economic prosperity of the United States and the economic prosperity of citizens, Americans, I can tell you now, is under unprecedented and currently unmitigatable risk. It's happening. There are also other factors that are taking place. The war in the Ukraine, the MLI group published recently top 20 threats, events, and risks that are unmitigated, and some of those are already being factored in, and we talked to different stakeholders about this, and especially decision makers of corporate and government or national. The key here is you need to look at these risks and how to mitigate them, whether you're a nation state and the leader of a nation state or whether you are a citizen. If you're a citizen and you and husband and wife, you're making your living, you're taking care of your children, you're paying your mortgage, and all of a sudden now the roof collapsed, it's a risk. You need to fix it, and then you say, well, how am I going to pay for this? You need to think in the same sense of urgency that needs to be addressed now, so that the impact of this economic dire economic prospect on the US and Americans is minimized. When I go back to the issue, the top 20 risks that we published, the Ukraine war. Prior to the Ukraine war, the BRICS organization barely got a discussion on the news, maybe on the sixth or seventh page of a newspaper, seldom on any news reports. Ladies and gentlemen, the last BRICS meeting in August 2023, if my memory serves me correctly, there were more than 70 nations that submitted applications to join. So in addition to having China, Russia, India, South Africa, new countries are joining. Saudi Arabia is joining, and many other top 20 economic nations are joining. And they will also they've already started to trade with each other in denomination that is no longer just the US dollar. That impact on US prosperity economically and Americans' prosperity economically is already, that snowball effect had already started. Now it's going to be picking up more momentum. And once they decide on a single currency within BRICS, for now, you can do your own math. If out of the global trade that takes place today, or let's say that out of the global trade that took place, let's say 2 years ago, okay, before the Ukraine war, if that 100% of that, well, the 100% of that was done by using the US dollar as the denomination or currency denomination of trade, if that drops to, let's say, by 5%, which has dropped more than 5%, by the way, if it drops 10%, you can do a simple math exercise in determining what kind of an impact this will have on the US economy. Furthermore, in the last 30 plus years, since 1989, since the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Berlin Wall, the United States found itself as the single and only superpower around the world. And I'm going to share this with you, and I hope this really will resonate very well. And instead of taking the opportunity to championing the values that our founding fathers actually proclaimed to America and we proclaimed to the world about freedom, democracy, freedom of speech, all of these wonderful values, instead of launching this and giving this to the world, what did we do? We embarked from 1990-91 on a narrative and a global war of regime change. Many of you who are old enough would remember news perpetrated, by the way, the neoconservatives who were running the show in those days in DC and in the US government. And basically, it was regime change, going from Iraq to go to Iran, to Libya, to Syria, to Lebanon, etc., etc. Of course, that plan did not materialize. But here's what happened. That plan of regime change was indicative of US foreign policy, that if you are a dictator in those countries, in any country around the world, but you are a supporter of the US, you're cool, continue dictating, continue oppressing, as long as you're our boy. So what we failed, and I'm going to give you an analogy how I wish the US had followed what I call in my book, Survivability, a McDonald's foreign policy strategy. And you think, McDonald's, give you an example. McDonald's, a couple of decades ago, discovered all of a sudden that people want to eat healthy and they want to have better choices when they go out for fast food. And everybody knows, McDonald's, fried burgers, fried chicken, fried burger, French fries, sugary food. It didn't take long. Literally overnight, McDonald's decided to put healthy choices on their menu. So they added salads. Instead of having sodas, they added juices, they added water, and it helped them to maintain the global leadership in the fast food market by offering choices to their client base. Had the US followed a McDonald's strategy in foreign policy, which is give the people around the world what they are seeking, what we proclaim, instead of giving them what we have been giving them for the last 3-4 decades, ladies and gentlemen, today we would be having more people waving around the world, waving the American flag than burning it or stepping on it. This is why we need to ask ourselves, are these politicians in Washington, D.C. representing our interests? Have they been representing our interests? And the truth of the matter here is they haven't. In the Ukraine war, they have not been representing our interests. The people in Hawaii who have endured that fire that literally took so many houses and made so many thousands of Hawaiian American citizens homeless, were barely getting any help, while Ukraine got more than 150 billion in the last year and a half, my dear friends. So put it in perspective. When you put all of these risks, the complicity in the US, the complicity of the United States government in in Israel's war crimes and genocide and on Gaza civilians, the war in the Ukraine, the supporting Ukraine while we're not looking after our own people. We have soldiers in Syria and Iraq, and these were not invited by anybody, and there's not even a debate in Congress of what they're there to do. Ladies and gentlemen, the new trend of citizens, consumers all over the world, already starting to actually vote with the way they actually consume on a daily basis, is a clear and direct and unprecedented threat to the US economy and its prosperity and the prosperity of our American citizens. Now the question here is, what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to share this with you, and you may not like this, but unless something truly significant, magnificently significant happens that alters that direction, and I'm not optimistic it will immediately, but it might happen if we as citizens step up and say no. And I'll tell you why I do this and why I'm not wasting my time talking to you as fellow Americans and citizens of the world. The average American citizen is not only a good human being, he's an exceptional human being, he or she. Why? Because they really see a lot of things in binary methodology. Binary, it's either good or bad. They vote on topics, good or bad. If you truly do not agree and do not support, and you are horrified that no nation in the world can actually offer any justification for killing civilians at mass level the way the Israelis have, you need to speak out. And there's something else you need to do. If you truly believe that cutting off electricity, food, water to 2.2 million citizens in Gaza is acceptable, is for children to die from malnutrition as an act of a government to punish civilians on a mass scale for the actions of a small group is acceptable, go back to doing what you're doing. But I believe that your common sense and your values will not accept you to doing this. You can't. I'm not going to horrify you by showing you some of the photos and videos and pictures of children who have been not only killed, but mutilated. And I'm not talking about lies like the lies about the 40 beheaded Israeli babies, a lie that Benjamin Netanyahu started and our President Biden, repeated, unfortunately, like a parrot, and then the White House had to retract it. By that time, the damage is already done. There is no 40 babies that have been beheaded by Hamas, Israeli babies, by the way. This is a lie. But the videos that I've seen, and I'm not going to disgust you with seeing some of those of children wrapped in cloth before burial, mutilated bodies, by a nation, by a government that claims to be doing this in self-defense. I'm sorry. This cannot be allowed to continue and go unpunished and unaddressed in the 21st century. Because if we don't, whatever remaining caliber, whatever remaining ounce of decency and legitimacy we claim to have in this rules-based order or global world order will vanish, And unless we fall back on what truly made America great and the values that made America great, we have no chance at maintaining our global leadership, our economic prosperity, and the prosperity of citizens in America. So what you need to do as a citizen is the following. First, next elections, put in a blank sheet of paper for anybody who starts from the party with an R, Republican, or with a D, Democrats. And I'm not sure any independents have a chance either. Secondly, start voting with your economics from today. I'll have to remember the name of that. I'll pull it out and give it to you. But fundamentally, stop consuming products that are produced by the state of Israel. Write to your senators saying, no longer, not in my name, that you will withdraw your support of them in the next elections, okay? Unless they declare that they have changed their position, and they will be calling on, and this is the crux of what needs to happen. Unless those in governments, whether in Israel, Palestine, whoever, and in the US, those who committed the war crimes and the genocide, and those who are complicit, unless there are prosecutions brought against these individuals, government officials, and transparent prosecution of these officials, we in the West have no chance whatsoever to roll back the tide and maintain US supremacy and US economic prosperity. And don't be fooled by recent changes in the tone by President Biden in showing that his displeasure with Benjamin Netanyahu. They're both playing from the same playbook in the same game. And while Benjamin Netanyahu might be thrown under the bus by the Israelis or the US administration to actually usher in a new direction to save the US from the significant backlash of these repercussions of these Israeli actions. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled, because unless we do what I've just suggested, especially the war crimes prosecutions be brought in, there can be no peace in the Middle East, and we will have no stability in the US, because people are now more informed. They're not stupid. They've seen enough. And those who have never been supporters of Palestinians or didn't care whether Israel did or didn't, now have taken positions, and they're really taking action. And it's time for us as Americans to do the same. At least, as I mentioned before, if we wanted to do it, at least for our own self-interest, we need to do that. But I believe our self-interest and our morality are 100% aligned. And if we do it for our self-interest and our prosperity and our morality, at least we will sleep well at night saying we're doing our part. And with that, I'm going to close and ask you to always question everything. Whenever you watch the news, question everything. And it's not easy, it's hard. We in America are not used to following politics. And anybody that tells you it's complicated, tell them it's not. We Americans believe in justice. We need to give justice to the Palestinians who have been living like refugees for 75 years. We can't afford to do that, to continue doing this, because if you keep treating people like dogs, expect horrible things to happen. And that's not condoning any actions of any killings, but you know what? That's the reality of life. And new awareness will need to come in, and only then can we secure US prosperity and the prosperity of Americans from today forward, moving forward. In the meanwhile, I bid you farewell, and be on the lookout for another episode where I'll talk about, contrary to what you hear out there, what is it that the Palestinians are fighting for? What is Hamas fighting for? Don't believe everything you read on the news. And what are the Israelis fighting for? And once you hear my take on this, you'll probably see things also in a different angle. I hope I've challenged your conventional thinking enough, made you think in a different way, and perhaps I've given you a path forward as how to secure your own prosperity and the prosperity of our nations. In the meanwhile, look after yourself, take care. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.